So, the origins of criminal behavior. What's important for me in this chapter is that we talked about frustration and experience, and also the learning curve around what creates a victim as operant conditioning, classical conditioning, and what exactly goes into the origins of the behavior of a criminal. So, what I decided to do my little research on was frustration and experience. Now, more so frustration versus experience. Operant conditioning and classical conditioning are talked a lot about earlier in the chapter, but I believe that frustration and experience really kind of fit with what I would like to talk about because I found it really interesting in this chapter. Now, when behavior toward a goal is blocked, that is what is considered frustration. Now, the book talks about goals versus helplessness. So it talks about that people with goals, people who are more ambitious, ambition doesn't always mean a good thing. So people with goals and ambition are more likely to commit crimes due to frustration rather than those that feel helpless. Because those that feel helpless feel like no matter what they do, who they become, what acts they carry out, nothing's going to change for them. That's why they're helpless. But people who have goals and ambitions, when they don't succeed in what they do, then it creates a problem for them. It creates a frustration or a block in their mind, so to say. Now in the book, scientist Berkowitz explains that frustration is about a long series of needs not being fulfilled. And more so, it's a buildup rather than a learning process, as discussed earlier in the chapter. It's more of a buildup of unwanted events in a criminal's mind. It's the accumulation of rejection, so either from women, peers, family, other friends, extended family, anybody really, coworkers even. It's the accumulation of rejection revolving around that. And if we take a look at serial killers and serial rapists and very violent crimes, if we take a look into their profiles, most of the time it points toward rejection in the past. In rapist case, most of the time women, maybe even their mother or something on that sort of lines. With killers, we know famous one with Ted Bundy and his mother, not getting along, and there's just a lot of circumstances that that can play into a killer's mind that involve rejection. So I think it's a really important thing to talk about. Now, on the other hand, experience. I like to talk about this even though it's a little bit outside the book. Experience, I believe, plays even a bigger role, perhaps the biggest, in forming what we call the criminal mind or the origins of criminal behavior. Now, young age trauma is the main point that I'd like to go over. From a very young age, a child or anyone can experience big and serious trauma, perhaps whether it's being a victim of something, being a bystander, watching something happen, witnessing something that you never thought would ever occur, maybe even a family member dying or anything of that sort of lines. And I'd like to look into a lot of the research too about rape and rapists that have actually been a victim in the past and are now committing those heinous acts. I'd like to find that there's a good correlation between them committing an act and then in the past they have been affected by it, whether it's molestation or something on the lines of sexual harassment by a family member, anything that sort of lines. We can also see this with alcoholics. Most of the time, fathers who grew up with an alcoholic, I'm not saying this in any sort of way, like I don't want to put this in anyone's minds, but a lot of the time we do see that fathers who grew up with a father who was an alcoholic or a dad who took it out on the kids and the wife, most of the time alcoholics now grew up as an alcoholic, not the other way around. So it's just important to see and make the connection between how a victim of a crime or a victim of a certain experience, wrapping around the whole gist of it, a victim of a traumatic experience could very well become a criminal in the future. I'd like to talk about, on a less serious note, the show Dexter. This is one of my favorite shows growing up. And although it's fantasy and it's not really, it's obviously not real, it's a TV show, it does have a little bit of truth in it, in the fact that the show starts off with the main character, Dexter, witnessing his mother being slaughtered in front of him. And it takes a really huge toll on him, and he becomes a serial killer in the future. And it's because he buried that memory so deep within him that has caused such pain, and he turned out to be the most prolific serial killer in the show. So obviously it's fantasy and it's not real, but it's good to take a look at these kind of things because they do have some truth in them. As we talked about earlier in the weekly discussion, we talked about how kids rejected by their peers, often turn out to be socially inept in some sort of way. I do believe plays a really big role in experience part. As rejection, just like when we went back to the frustration part about serial killers, rejection from your peers, friends, family, takes a big toll on you, carries on, throughout middle school, throughout high school, into everyday parts of your life. And, it's just stays with you forever. So it's not good. And I'd also like to point out that in a class just recently, I did a project on Omar Mateen and researched into his profile, the Pulse nightclub shooter. And I had found that he was a victim of rejection throughout middle school and high school. And I felt like that was a really big part of why he became a murderer, a mass murderer, killed 49 people. And it just shows that, experiences in the past can really, correlate to what can happen in the future. And yeah, thank you.